Welcome to the Dave LewAllen Podcast. Today, sports stories. And my guest is Dave Lewis, the former Red Wings player, assistant coach, head coach, a man who's played over 1,000 regular season games in the National Hockey League. We'll hear from Dave some of the stories, more about his background and life in hockey. But first, just a word about what we're attempting to do here with this podcast. Does the world need another podcast? That's debatable, of course, but here we are, and it's part of my next chapter after 35 years as an anchor, sports anchor, reporter at WXYZ in Detroit. An effort to stay engaged and involved in the community, and I thought it'd be an awful lot of fun to talk with people that I've gotten to know in the business over the years, that I've covered, that I've met, that I've had interactions with, and that includes Dave Lewis here today. It's the Dave LewAllen Podcast. At the moment, that's a working title. The name could change, may very well change, but here we are today, and we'll see where things go from here. But for now, let's introduce our special guest today, Dave Lewis. He is a friend. He's a guy I covered at the end of his playing career throughout his time as an assistant coach and then head coach with the Detroit Red Wings, and a relationship that has continued beyond his coaching days as well. Welcome, and thank you for being part of this inaugural podcast.
No problem, Dave. I wish you all the best, and I'm certainly sure it'll be a success.
Well, we'll see. Time will tell about that. Your life in hockey certainly has been a success, and let's talk about that. 1,000 games in the NHL. I looked that up this morning, in fact. Only 382 players in NHL history have played over 1,000 regular season games. That's pretty select company.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was, people ask me what was the most exciting part of it, and I guess my first game and my 1,000th game, and then in between it was like a joyride. So, interesting story. When I played my 1,000th game, it was at Joe Louis Arena, and I wore number 52 when I came to Detroit. Throughout my whole career, I would wear number 25. I wore number 25 in New York, number 25 in LA, number 25 in New Jersey. But when I came to Detroit, John Ogrodnik wore number 25. So somewhere through that season, that my first season here, he got traded to New York. So I came up with this idea and had to get permission from the league, from the NHL, that I would start the game with number 52, and I ended the game wearing number 25. And I don't know if that's ever been done before, but I did it, and I remember it like it was yesterday. My children were on the ice, my wife, and it was an exciting time, and we had an emotional evening.
Within the game?
Within the game, yeah. Between periods, I changed the jersey. And I don't know if anybody else in the building knew, but I did. So I ended my career, or I played a 1,000th game with the number that I had used my whole career.
Did you save that jersey? Is that jersey in the Hockey Hall of Fame?
No, not. Yeah, it's in the Dave Lewis Hall of Fame. Yeah, it's in my basement. Hanging up. It's a nice memory, good keepsake. And I have a picture of me laying on the ice, and whoever took the picture put 1,000 pucks around my head. So for me, it was quite a big to-do.
Well, for anybody, by reference to the fact that there's only 382 players who ever achieved that. Yeah. All right, growing up in Saskatchewan, playing hockey as a young boy, and then progressing. I mean, you can't ever imagine, number one, that maybe that the dream of the NHL comes true, but imagining yourself playing 1,000 games in the NHL.
Yeah, no. When you're growing up, I grew up in a small town, like a lot of kids out Western Canada, or even across Canada, and the U.S. now too. But playing street hockey, playing hockey on outdoor arena, I remember growing up, there was cereal boxes that would have pictures of NHL players on the back of them. So I made my mother buy this particular cereal. I cut the pictures out and pasted them on my wall, and just played a lot of hockey, because back then, one TV channel, Not much to do in the middle of winter in Saskatchewan, but skate and play hockey. So had some good coaches, good tutoring, and had a lot of fun doing it.
This is Kindersley,
Saskatchewan. And Bob Bourne, who four-time Stanley Cup winner with the New York Islanders, we played together since we were 12 years old. We actually won the provincial championship at age of 13, and I showed people the picture. They said, well, of course you won. You had two guys that played in the NHL. So a lot of great memories. That's what we did. I mean, there was nothing else to do. So we were fortunate enough and blessed enough, I guess, to get talent and some coaching and guidance and continue on our career. We played together in Saskatoon with the Blades, and then we played together in the New York Islanders.
So Saskatoon, that's Western Hockey League, that's junior hockey, that's the top level of junior hockey in Canada and some U.S. cities now as well in junior hockey. 2 seasons with the Saskatoon Blades, but were you able to live at home while you did that? Were you with a billet family? And
No.
Tell me about that.
My mother, somebody had requested me to play somewhere, I think Thunder Bay or something. My mother wouldn't let me leave home till I graduated high school. So I had graduated high school, and back then you were a little older before you got drafted. And so I was 18, moved to Saskatoon, and had to live with a billet. And the person I billeted with was Pat Price, who ended up being the number 1 pick overall in the WHA, also drafted by the NHL. So we lived together for a couple of years. And I guess my second year, I realized that there might be a chance to be drafted. Wasn't really sure. We had a pretty good team. We had a good coach, and Jack McLeod, who coached Canadian national team at one time. And as things happened, I got drafted by the New York Islanders in the NHL and the Edmonton Oilers of the World Hockey League. And my dream was to play in the NHL, and Edmonton seemed awfully close to home, which I didn't want to be. So ended up being drafted by the Islanders.
1973,
Yep.
third round, 33rd overall. What was the draft like then? Because now it's a big show, and all the top players are in the stands waiting for their name to be called, and you go on stage with the team that drafted you, and you get your picture taken with the jersey and the whole group of executives. It wasn't that way in 1973.
Wasn't quite like that. In Saskatoon, which that's where the team was, a bigger city, it's the biggest city in Saskatchewan. I went to the local newspaper and had to go in their offices and the ticker tape or whatever they call it. Yeah. That's how I found out that I was drafted. Like you say, the first pick overall was Dennis Potts, the New York Islanders, and I knew that they didn't. I didn't know where I was going to be drafted, or by who, and then it kept going through the first round, no, and then through the second round, no, and then I was the first pick in the third round. So I teased Denny Potvin, who is, Hall of Famer. I said, you and I are both first picks. And we both laugh about that. He was the first pick overall. I was the first pick in the third round.
Well, and tell me about Potvin, because obviously the career he had, but the beginnings the two of you had. Yeah,
fabulous player, obviously, a Hall of Fame, played at every level, Team Canada, Olympics, whatever. Just a competitor, strong, focused, driven player, and wouldn't back down, fearless. He is, one of those guys that you have a chance to build a franchise around. And then the good job that, Bill Torrey did, and Jimmy D was there, as a scout at that time. He was the one that drafted me, and it was the start of something really good, and we started to develop good. We had some good mentorship as young players with some good, Bert Marshall was my partner. There's some guys that most people don't know who they are, but came along, and we learned together, learned how to play the game the correct way with a great coach under Al Arbor. And Denny was the first, one of the first stepping stones, along with a guy named Billy Harris, who was their first pick overall in the Islanders franchise history.
Dave Lewis joining us on the Dave LewAllen Podcast. 1,000 games in the NHL as a player, coach as well, head coach with the Detroit Red Wings, Boston Bruins, coached internationally as well, which we will get into on this podcast. Back to the Islanders, though. 1972 was the expansion year. You mentioned Billy Harris, the number one pick overall. I saw the Islanders in that first season as a kid at Olympia against the Red Wings. The name I remember most from that team was Ed Westfall because he had a name, yet came in the expansion draft to the Islanders. And so he and Billy Harris kind of were the first two guys that I paid attention to anyway as a young hockey fan.
Right. Eddie Westfall came from the Boston Bruins, and he was their first captain, the Islanders' first captain. And he brought a lot of credibility to the franchise, to a young franchise. And I know that he mentored Billy Harris. He mentored a bunch of the young guys. And he, to this day, they call him captain, just like 18, captain, whatever. And he still active with the Islanders in like ambassador capacity. He does a lot of stuff with them. And he was our captain for a long time. And, there was very a positive influence on us.
Only 12 wins in that first season.
Yeah, that's probably why I made the team.
Well, 16 the next year in your first season.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier on about remembering your first game and that 1,000th game.
Yep.
Tell me about that first game as a rookie in the NHL, and you never played a single game in the minor leagues.
No.
You went from junior hockey right to the Islanders.
Yeah, so I remember in the training room, a player named Craig Cameron had a career in the NHL, had his legs crossed in his underwear, smoking a cigarette, had a cup of coffee, and I'm a nervous wreck getting ready for my. He said, "Don't worry about a thing, you'll be fine." So that sort of made me calm down a bit and got on, started the game and finished the game, and I was so happy, so proud to play just one NHL game because growing up, it's any kid's dream to play that one game, and that was. Such a special moment for me to play that game, and it started a good career for me.
Started a life in hockey.
Yeah, in hockey.
In the NHL. So that first year was maybe baptism under fire, if you will. The team from that point on, though, got steadily better.
Yeah, we started to develop, and I'll back up a little bit. So. My wife, it'll be our 49th wedding anniversary coming up really soon. She came after training camp to Long Island, flew from Saskatoon to Toronto to New York. And as it turned out, we had our last exhibition game in Boston on that Saturday night. And back then you flew commercial. So we had to wait the Sunday morning, flew commercial to Long Island, landed at LaGuardia, got on the team bus, went to the Nassau Coliseum, got my car, rushed back to LaGuardia to pick my girlfriend up at the time, and we got married the next year. But she had a dog traveling with her because she was going to live with me in Long Island. And so I drive back to LaGuardia, and I ask one of the bellhops up front, or whatever you call them, the sky caps, you know where the flight from Toronto is, what gate it's coming in? He looked at me really strange and he said, I would think that the flight from Toronto is going to land at JFK.
Oh.
And I go, what is JFK? I had no idea there was two airports in Long Island at the time. So needless to say, no cell phone. I had to figure out how to get from LaGuardia to JFK. I was about 2.5 hours late. She was mad. People wouldn't help her with the dog. That wasn't the way to start off a relationship in New York, but it turned out all right.
Yeah,
So,
I'll say.
yeah, so that first year we had, peaks and valleys, and it's so different than junior hockey. You had to learn how to deal with the travel, the game itself, the players, the skill, the strength, the speed, how to deal with the media, how to deal with, the coach and how he reacts to each individual player. So it was a big learning curve for a lot of us. And there was a lot of young guys on the team, but Al did a great job in that. And we had some good mentors, like I said, Eddie Westfall, Bert Marshall, Billy McMillan. He just passed away. But it helped us grow individually and collectively as a team.
And it didn't take long. You made the playoffs 5 straight years. Yep. 4 of those 5 years, you went to the third round.
Yep.
I mean, you knew something special was happening there.
Yeah, it was starting to fall together with some, other great draft picks, Clark Gillies, Mike Bossy, Brian Trottier, Bob Bourne ended up coming there. and then some key pickups, Billy Smith and Chico Resch. And so it was, if you wanted to model a franchise, that would be a good one to study and to follow. I sort of in my mind remember Al Arbor saying, you got to have 3 lines, 2 scoring lines, a checking line, and a specialty line, and then you got to have an anchor on the fence, like a Dennis Potvin, aka a little bit like a Nick Lidstrom, and then obviously goaltending. Billy Smith, a Hall of Fame goaltender, but a lot of good things happening, and I guess. I remember going through that development phase, and you felt the pressure as you continued on, year 4, year 5, year 6, and there was external pressure from the media and the fans that things better start coming together, and as it turned out, it did.
And then March 10th, 1980 happened.
Yep.
And as this team was moving toward the ultimate goal, you were traded at the trading deadline with Billy Harris. That had to be a devastating moment.
It was devastating for me. Brenda, my wife, was pregnant, and we had to get up and leave. I found out we were watching Johnny Carson, and there was rumors in the locker room that there was going to be a trade for a forward, and we weren't sure who, but we thought it was going to be somewhere like Edmonton. That was sort of the gut feel of some of the players, but as it turned out, I got a call just after 1 o'clock in the morning, I believe it was, from Bill Torrey that I had been traded to Los Angeles along with Billy Harris, and that you have to come and get your equipment and then head out there the next day. So, of course, it was a sleepless night. There were some tears, and I'll never forget flying over Manhattan, leaving Long Island, and it's just sort of like you're leaving where you grew up. And I grew up as a player in Long Island, and ended up flying out to L.A., and Butch Goring came, and he was a centerman behind Brian Trottier, offensive guy, and then Wayne Merrick and Lorne Henning were the centermen. That was the last piece of the puzzle for the Islanders. And to add even to that, I was expendable because a young player named Kenny Morrow, coming off the 1980 Olympics U.S. hockey team, Michigan kid, that they felt he was good enough to play, and he certainly was. And so the rest is history. They won 4 in a row once I got traded. But the good thing was that I got the phone call after they won in the locker room, and they just wanted, this was from the players, they just wanted me to be part of their success because the growing pains of all those years. So it was nice.
Well, sorry that you missed out on that, but you have your name on the Stanley Cup 3 times from your involvement with the Red Wings, which we will get into. Dave Lewis joining me on the Dave LewAllen Podcast today, talking about his life in hockey, some of the stories as well. I've told you before during lunches and the whatnot, as I've heard many of these stories, that you need to write a book. You have so many stories.
I'll tell you another Islander story.
Right.
So the one year we were in the playoffs, we were down 3-0 to Pittsburgh Penguins. And that was the year that we had knocked the Rangers off. So 1, 2, and 3, we knocked the Rangers off. We start the next series against Pittsburgh, and we're down 3-0. And every year in playoff time, there's a circus at Madison Square Garden. And one of the players' buddies, a lawyer, actually 2 lawyers and a restaurateur, got this idea that we needed something to break the hex of down 3-0 because coming back from a 3-game series at that point, only one team had done it since 1942. Somebody went to Madison Square Garden, got some gunny sacks, and filled it full of elephant dung. Brought it to the trainers and put it in the Nassau Coliseum for Game 4. We're down 3-0. Sure enough, we win that game and have to fly to Pittsburgh. So what do you think the trainers had to do? They had to package that up and bring it on the airplane, put it in the locker room. So we go to Pittsburgh, we win that game, we come back, we win that game, Game 7 in Pittsburgh. We won the game 1-0 with Eddie Westfall scoring the goal. So we advanced to play Philadelphia Flyers. We're down 3-0. Where do you think happens? The elephant dung comes back. Unfortunately, Kate Smith would sing the national anthem, so Eddie Westfall presented her Game 7 with a bouquet of a dozen roses, thinking that might break the hex with the dung, but they were just too good. They went on to win the Stanley Cup that year.
Wow.
Yeah, so the poor trainers had to drag this stuff around for, I don't know, 3 weeks, I guess.
And you guys had to be.
We had to, yeah, exactly. But
all right,
just
so the trade from the Islanders to the LA Kings, you were there 3 years, and then it was
Yep.
on to New Jersey, and then
Yep.
finally you ended your playing career in Detroit with the Red Wings, signed as a free agent.
Yep.
What at that point, as you reflect back, what were your expectations? So this was your going to be your 15th season, 14th season?
I played 15 total, so it would have been my 13th season coming here, 14th season. And, of course, I knew Jimmy Devellano. He drafted me, and he was the general manager at the time here in Detroit. Mike Ilitch was the owner, and Jimmy D was his first GM. And Jimmy knew me. He tried to get me from the Kings. I remember him talking to me about that, and then from the Devils, and it didn't happen. So I came as an unrestricted free agent for a whopping signing bonus of $25,000. In today's market, that's not very much. But came here, and he wanted me to be, and my wife, to sort of be like mentors, like a mentorship for the young players, for the young wives, and sort of take some of that osmosis out of the New York situation, the Islanders, and bring it into Detroit, along with some other veteran players.
And it was a young team still at that point. Steve
Yeah.
Yzerman, Probert, Koser,
a lot of young guys.
Greg Steffen, guys that, in some cases.
Peter Klima and Adam Oates, So
that had trouble just getting to practice on time, let alone, figuring out how to win NHL games.
So he wanted me to establish or help establish a certain culture that the Islanders had. And that was, working with young players, the Steve Yzermans, me being a former captain in Los Angeles. Stevie, eventually he was the captain. And what do you do as a captain? As a young player, you don't always know. You don't know what's the right thing. You don't know if you're going to step on some toes and so that was part of my responsibility besides being just a player, So we accepted that. My wife had a Halloween party, and I think Harold Schnepp threw a meatball on the white carpet, and one of my dogs ate it. My wife wasn't too happy with that. But we had a good run a couple of years in a row. With Gilbert Delorme and Lee Norwood and guys that
Whack and Hack,
back then, and a young Steve Yzerman, and like you said, Proby and Joey and Peter Klima and Adam Oates, and Tim Higgins was another guy that came to work every day, and it was a loosey-goosey locker room, and
made it to the conference finals in back-to-back seasons against Gretzky and the Oilers.
With Jacques Demers as our coach, and he was probably good for that team because it was just a collection of guys, and somehow he molded it into be a motivated group, and had that success that helped establish some of these young players anyway.
Eventually retired. 6 games in, I think, to the 87-88 season.
Yeah, the body had just sort of shut down, and had talked with Jacques Demers and talked with Jimmy D, and they sort of suggested I retire and then could stay with the team and help do some of the things that, had happened the year before, and work with the young guys. Don't necessarily travel with the team, but be like a pseudo coach. Come to the game, sit in the press box, and come to some practices, and so that sort of got my foot out of my playing career and a foot into the coaching career. So I have to thank both of them for that opportunity.
Did you think at some point you would want to coach?
I didn't really know. It's funny. In the hockey world, or in sports world, you sort of live day to day. Like you get ready for the game, you play the game, then you got to get rid of that game, then you got to get ready for practice or ready for travel. And I enjoyed mentoring players. I studied the game, so I enjoyed that. So that year sort of helped me. I remember in New Jersey, I took a real estate license when I played for the Devils. Didn't really want to do that. And then I went to Oakland Community College here after I retired for, some classes, English and, political science and stuff like that. But as it turned out, it was the right fit, and I got the right vibes doing it, and I enjoyed it, and that was just something that happened. So I was lucky.
Talking hockey with Dave Lewis, the former Red Wings player, assistant coach, and head coach. Among his resume in this life in hockey, and we're talking about that and some of the stories that go along with it. So eventually you become a full-fledged assistant, though, under Demers, and then Brian Murray, and then ultimately Scotty Bowman as well, where the Wings got back to where the franchise longed to be, Stanley Cup champions 3 times in the 6 years that that you were involved with the team as an assistant or associate coach.
So the first time I met Scotty, or not the first time I met Scotty, but the first time on the ice with Scotty was in Traverse City. We had training camp up there, as they still do today. And I'll never forget this. All the coaches are all around. Barry Smith, the other assistant, and I think it might have been Glenn Murkowski, who was coaching the American Hockey League team at the time. Coaches and GM, we all had a big meeting prior to the first practice. And you're taking notes, and here are the drills, and here's what, drill 1, and here's what we're going to accomplish. So up there they have 2 sheets of ice. And I was going to go on the ice with Scotty, and Barry Smith and Glenn Murkowski were going on the ice on the other side with the other. So we had, identical practices. And I step on the ice, and as you do, you just skate around slowly, and how the players just tap them or whatever. And so Scotty comes up to me. He says, "Dave, what's the first drill?" Now, in the back of my mind, I'm going, does he not know the first drill, or is he just tested me to see if I know the first drill? So sure enough, we do the first drill, and he comes by. Okay, what's the second drill? So this went on for an hour and 15 minutes through the whole practice. And to this day, I don't know if he didn't remember or didn't pay attention to the meeting we had, or if he just wanted me to make sure that I took care of things and he was there. So that was the first on-ice experience with Scotty.
All right, so there were many experiences, many stories that could be told. Maybe one or two that really help further kind of tell the tale of
relationships,
life with Scotty.
Well, I've told you this story before, but and I don't remember what year it was, and we were in a bit of a slump. Like, we maybe lost 1 or 2 games. Like, we had a pretty good team.
Yeah, that was a slump.
And so Barry Smith and I, after a game, would always get to Joe Louis Arena early to break down the video, watch, prepare. Some days we had video, some days we didn't. Maybe we did power play or whatever. So there's lots to do. And back then it was done on real tape, not like computer now. Yeah. But so we got in, and Barry's got a notepad, and I got a notepad. We're watching the game, and all of a sudden Barry's starting to write down. He's looking at number 14, and it was not back checking. And number 14 was Brendan Shanahan, one of our captains. Yeah. So after Barry's got a whole list of clips, and Scotty comes in an hour later and sits down, and he's grumpy because we had lost the night before. And Barry says, "I got something to show you, Scotty." So Barry brings these clips out, and look, he's not doing this, and he's not hitting, and Scotty's starting to get wound up. He's getting emotional, and he says, no wonder we can't win any of these games. He's one of our captains. He's not doing the things we ask him. That's not right. And so now Scotty's all wound up, and he says, "Barry, get the trainer, tell Shanny to get in here." Now, poor Shanny's in his underwear, his hair's disheveled, he's got a cup of coffee, he just got to the rink, and practice is an hour out yet, and he knocks on the door, and he says, "Yeah, I hear you guys want to see me." So Scotty looks at Shanny, he looks at Barry, and he looks at Shanny, and he says to Barry, not looking at Barry, he says, "Barry, tell him what you're saying about him." And he turns his back and walks over to the corner of the room with his cup of coffee. So now I'm biting my lip like, oh my God, what's Barry going to say now? He's like, he thought Scotty was going to present whatever Scotty wanted to present. Shanny's a captain. Yeah. Barry's got to watch what he says to him, and yet he's got to watch what he says because Scotty's right there. So he really boxed Barry in, and as it turned out, it wasn't quite as bad as
As it seemed like it was going to be.
Yeah, exactly. So that's just one of those many stories that.
So in Montreal, and I've read a lot about Scotty and the relationship with the players, that you hated them most of the time until you celebrated the Stanley Cup, which they did a lot in Montreal in those years. But working with him and having to kind of be a conduit between the players and the head coach. I mean, that relationship in Detroit with the players, mixed as well?
Yeah, oh yeah, you had to, I was like the filter. There would be a message from this way, and you have to figure out what message is going to go that way. It wouldn't always be verbatim, but you had to be the filter. And that's what I felt, or fireman I call it. There's little fires you have to put out, but you're filtering it. You want the players to get the message, but you want to make sure that the head coach is appeased, and you want to make sure the players understand and are appeased. And so there was a lot of that for 9 years, doing that. And there's another Scotty story, that we needed a defenseman in this particular game. And Glens Falls, New York, in Adirondack was the farm team. Aaron Ward was the player. Aaron Ward got called up on a Tuesday morning, let's say, for the morning skate. So he had to get up at the crack of dawn, get on the airplane with his own luggage, fly to Detroit, get picked up and brought to Joe Louis Arena by the time 10:30 in the morning when we had our morning skate. So now Aaron gets in, he's all excited, gets his gear on, gets out on the ice, does practice. Scotty's watching him, yells at him a couple times. Aaron off the ice. Scotty called, I think might have been Kenny at the time, or Jimmy D. I don't really remember who was in charge of the team. Scotty called him. He says, "He's no good. I don't want him. Send him back." So I had to go tell Aaron that he's not playing in tonight's game. He's got to go back to Glens Falls. So just one of those. Why? I don't know why, but he just didn't like what he saw in the morning skate. And,
it was Scotty.
Yeah, that's Scotty, yeah.
Well, and I told you this story about, when I was at Channel 7, we'd, be on the bench after practice. You guys would leave the ice, and we'd grab a player or two for quick little interviews. And I remember once grabbing Yzerman, and we're getting ready to do an interview. Everybody else was off the ice and in the locker room. One of the trainers or somebody came out and said to Steve, "Hey, Scotty's called a meeting. You got to go." And Steve, at that time, it was kind of like, screw him, basically. Yeah. Let's do the interview. So we did, and that was the last time that ever happened, because Scotty then no longer allowed interviews on the bench,
cameras on the bench
after practice. So we were up in the stands. Yep. And this was kind of the beginning of that Scotty Yzerman tension that ultimately led to the trade rumors that he was going to be traded to Ottawa. And then the other thing I specifically remember about that was the next season after all of that, and the introduction on opening night of the players and the ovation that Yzerman got that went on and on and on and on. In other words, saying, "Hey, Scotty,
leave this alone."
Right.
Yeah.
But after that, their relationship, obviously, Scotty imposed his will, and Steve Yzerman, for as great a player as he was, did change his game.
He did change his game, yeah. Stevie, I think when you're a young player and at his level, the skill.
He scored 60 goals.
Yeah. In your mind, being an offensive player, getting recognized, getting to an all-star game or whatever, you establish your career. And he had the ability to do that. The one area that Stevie really worked on and became a master at is his defensive game. Winning key defensive faceoffs, killing key penalties, blocking shots, doing the things that when he was younger he didn't do. And I think Scotty had a real influence on him doing that. And Scotty, the one thing with Scotty, he knew what it took to win. And he knew what kind of player he wanted. And he knew that, I'm certainly sure, we didn't really talk about it a lot, but he saw Stevie as the highly offensive player, but he wanted him to be a complete player. And I think, as it turned out, when I say complete player, a complete player at a high level at both ends of the puck, offense and defense. And it worked out for all of us that were around and that were involved with that Stevie became the Steve Yzerman that player or fans and players saw every day in those runs.
Yeah, and now he's the one making decisions, directing the fortunes of the franchise. We could talk all day, of course, and I appreciate this opportunity on this inaugural podcast that Dave Lewis is here to tell some of those stories about your life in hockey. You succeeded Scotty Bowman as head coach of the Detroit Red Wings after the Stanley Cup win in 2002. It's like following Johnny Carson or anybody else. You're not supposed to do that. But by the same token, it was the opportunity to be a head coach in the NHL. So, of course, you're going to take that job. And, by the way, you got a team that had just won the Stanley Cup.
Let me back up just a little bit. 2002, we had signed Dominic Hasek, Luke Robitaille, Brett Hull came in, and we lose Game 1 and Game 2 to Vancouver. Of the first series in Joe Louis Arena. Now we fly to Vancouver, and we had an afternoon practice, and all the coaches, the managers, scouts were in one room 2.5 hours before practice. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What we got to do something to change the mood, to change whatever. So everybody had a suggestion. So now the players start filtering into the locker room for getting ready for practice. Scotty gets up, walks out, and comes back in. He says, "Yep, I just talked to Nick Lidstrom. Nick Lidstrom suggests that we play Fredrik Olofsson and maybe we'll drop Uwe Krupp out of the lineup." And sure enough, that was how practice was set up with the colors of the jerseys. So I went up to Nick Lidstrom and said, "Nick, you talked to Scotty today?" "Nope, I haven't talked to him for a couple days." "Okay." And the rest is history. We went on to win, and we won the cup that year. So back after, back after following Scotty, I knew the expectations, but it was an opportunity that I couldn't turn down.
Well, and let's set the record straight that you had 2 48-win seasons, 100-plus point seasons. That's good by any standard, but you didn't win in the Stanley Cups.
Exactly, So It just didn't happen. There's a certain time where the players, they do burn out too. That inner drive is sort of gone, and but it was a challenge for sure. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the opportunity to work with the organization, to work with all those great players, and for me, it just it was I couldn't turn it down.
Well, and 20 years with the organization overall as a player and coach. I mean, that's a hell of a chapter in anyone's life, and a successful chapter by any measure.
So,
I'm sure you would have liked to have, had that opportunity extend further there, but you eventually wound up in Boston for a year as head coach?
Yeah, Boston a year as a head coach, and
4-year contract.
1 year, so it didn't work out, and that happens, and then went to Los Angeles as an assistant coach because I played there for 3 years, and then went to Carolina for, I don't even know, 2.5 or 3 years in the NHL, and then the next opportunity came. I coached a little bit in the KHL with the former Red Wing Glenn Hanlon, who was the head coach. Fired again. So if you're not fired, you're not a good coach, I guess, or something. Did the stint 1 year as a national team coach for Team Ukraine, who both my grandparents came from Ukraine. They grew up in, they didn't grow up, but I grew up in Saskatchewan. They had immigrated here through Ellis Island, and then got to be a head coach of the Belarusian national team for 3.5 years.
Which was...
I'm glad I'm not there.
Yes, right now especially. It's sad.
Yeah, it is awful.
For Ukraine, for even the Russian people, but also, Belarus being kind of drawn in, or seemingly being drawn into the conflict or attempts that way. But I've heard some of the stories of the experience with the Belarusian team. You've shared some of that with me in the past. Is there one maybe that you can tell that kind of...
One of the odd situations where there was a young player who had pulled a groin, and he was in the training room, and they were trying to get him ready. The trainers and doctors were trying to get him ready. It's a little different over there than it is here. Get him ready to play. And one of the players came to me, or maybe it was assistant coach. He says, "You got to go in the training room. You won't believe this." So I go in the training room, And on this guy's legs, he had a towel draped over him. He had probably, I would guess, 9 to 10, 10 to 11 leeches on his legs. They're sucking blood, trying to, I'm not sure what, stimulate blood flow. I don't know. But that was one of the things that I will never forget, ever. Yeah. So.
How difficult was that? I mean, you didn't speak the language, right?
Yeah. Some of them spoke English. I had an interpreter. It's funny. They sort of understand. Like, I was lucky enough to coach like Vladimir Konstantinov, Sergei Fedorov, who they didn't really. There's a language barrier, but you had to figure out ways to communicate with a board or with video or on the ice. And I sort of did that, but I had a full-time interpreter. The problem with an interpreter is you make a presentation, and if it's a 5-minute presentation, it turns into 10 or 12. And then you lose the players because their attention span is not so great. But once the game got going, adjustments, I'd have to call the guy over and explain or get somebody there. But it seemed to work out fine. We had, Team Belarus had never beat USA, and we beat USA my first tournament. And so it was a life experience. It was really interesting. A lot of stories, a lot of funny situations that aren't typical of North American hockey or the NHL, but a great life experience.
And how many trips across the pond?
In the 3.5 years prior to my retirement, I crossed the ocean 32 times just to get to like Amsterdam, Frankfurt, or Paris, and then from there I had another 2.5-hour flight. So if I never see the inside of an airplane again, I'll be happy. So yeah, a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. So as we wrap things up, and again, we could talk all day, and
Yeah.
I'm so appreciative of your time doing this, telling some of these great stories that maybe some are hearing for the first time.
I'm sure.
And that's a wonderful thing. As you reflect back though on this hockey life,
Yeah.
you're certainly grateful for this life that this
it's-
game has given you.
It's given me everything I had. And I'll tell you one little quick story from where I came from. In my hometown of Kinnersley, Saskatchewan, 4,500 people, small town in the middle of nowhere, there came a point where my mother had to make a decision. I had general skating and my hockey program for this particular year. I might have been 10 or 12, or can't remember what age I was. It was going to cost $12 for the ice time and for the hockey. And she was balking at paying it because she couldn't afford to pay it. But as it turned out, it was $12 well spent because, I have what we have and got to see the world and have a fabulous family, and it was something special. And in hockey, it's not so much about the games, it's about the people you meet. Players, like I just got back from a reunion in Long Island, some of the old players that I played with, and you don't talk much about the hockey games. You talk about the relationships, and some of the stories with the coaches are about, like, Al Arbor and somebody breaking an egg over his head and that story. And so it's a lot of good people in hockey, a lot of really good people.
What a life. And you're one of those good people.
Well, thank you. You are too, Dave. And I don't know what kind of hockey player you were, but you're still a good person.
I was not a hockey player.
Okay.
Let's leave it at that.
Okay.
Thanks for this today.
Okay. Good luck with it too, by the way.
Thank you. Dave Lewis, the former Red Wing player, assistant coach, head coach, with a lifetime of hockey experiences. We thank him for joining us on this inaugural podcast. We'll see you next time.